Leonard, step out of the booth for me and keep the lane clear. I'm processing traffic right now. Is there an operational issue?
Badge number on record. Leonard Darnell George. 14 years sworn to defend the U.S. border. The drug traffickers he worked with called him the goalie. And in about 30 seconds, you'll understand exactly why.
Another officer is taking your lane. We need to talk about vehicles you cleared last week. Vehicles I cleared? You'll have to be more specific.
He would not get the chance to talk his way out. Within hours of that confrontation, federal agents would seize his phone, his Cadillac purchase records, and a text message thread that documented 6 months of paid border crossings down to the dollar. 19 separate occasions. Hundreds of pounds of methamphetamine waved through his lane. $68,000 for 4 vehicles in a single transaction. The man at the primary inspection booth at the busiest land border crossing in the Western Hemisphere had a nickname his traffickers used in writing. They called him the goalie. Before we go any further, the nickname those traffickers gave him tells you everything about how he saw his own job. Drop a comment if it lands the same way for you. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. We hold federal officers accountable on this channel every single week, and the names you are about to hear should be on every list. Leonard Darnell. George was born on March 14, 1982, in National City, California, the second of 3 children in a family that lived 8 blocks from the chain-link fence separating the United States from Tijuana. His mother, Yvonne George, worked the overnight shift as a certified nursing assistant at Paradise Valley Hospital. His father, Marcus George, drove a forklift at the 10th Avenue Marine Terminal at the Port of San Diego, loading container ships for 31 years before his back finally gave out. Money was tight. The household ran on routine and discipline. Lights out at 9. Homework done before television. The hum of the freeway exit ramp 2 blocks east was the soundtrack of his childhood. He grew up watching the border from a distance his whole life. The fence was always there. The helicopters were always there. The green and white Border Patrol Suburbans rolled through his neighborhood every day. At Sweetwater High School in National City, he was an unremarkable student and a serviceable defensive back on the football team. His coach wrote on his junior year evaluation that he had good instincts at the line of scrimmage and made up for average speed with anticipation. He graduated in the spring of 2000 with a C+ average and no clear plan beyond knowing he was not going to spend his life on a Long Beach forklift like his father. He enlisted in the United States Marine Corps 3 months later. Boot camp at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego, the same yellow footprints his great-uncle had stood on a generation earlier. He served 4 years as a logistics specialist at Camp Pendleton, deploying once to Kuwait in 2003 as part of the supply chain feeding the invasion of Iraq. His discharge in 2004 was honorable. The DD-214 listed 2 good conduct ribbons and 0 disciplinary actions. For the next 8 years, he drifted through working-class jobs in the South Bay. Forklift operator at a Costco distribution center in Chula Vista. Loss prevention at a Walmart on Sweetwater Road. Overnight security guard at a self-storage facility off Plaza Boulevard. By 2012, he was 30 years old, married, with a son in the 2nd grade, and a stepdaughter in middle school. The bills came faster than the paychecks. He took a second job on the weekends pulling overnight shifts at a warehouse off the 805 freeway. He still owed money on a credit card from 2008. In 2013, a Marine friend told him about customs and border protection, the federal pay scale, the full pension after 20, the badge. He applied that same year. His application packet went through 11 months of review, polygraph testing, background investigation, and medical clearance. He reported to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, in early 2014. 18 weeks of academy training, constitutional law, use of force, Spanish language proficiency, inspection procedures, counterterrorism response, vehicle search techniques. His academy evaluations described him as calm under pressure, respectful with the cadre, and shows strong aptitude for primary inspection procedures. He graduated in the top third of his class. His first duty assignment was the San Isidro port of entry, 20 minutes from the house he had grown up in. He pinned the badge to his uniform shirt on a Monday morning in July of 2014. His starting salary was $61,000 and change. His mother kept a framed copy of the swearing-in photograph on the wall of her living room for the next 10 years. His father told him, the day he came home in uniform, that he had finally found something steady. He believed it. So did everyone who knew him. He worked San Isidro for the next 7 years without a single complaint on his record. San Isidro is not just a border crossing. It is the largest single land port of entry in the Western Hemisphere, and on most days of the year, it is the busiest. Roughly 70,000 vehicles cross north into the United States every 24 hours. Roughly 30,000 pedestrians. The wait at the vehicle lanes can stretch to 3 hours on a holiday weekend. The infrastructure of the port is enormous. 25 primary inspection lanes for personal vehicles, a separate truck cargo facility, a pedestrian processing hall, banks of license plate readers, radiation portal monitors, and overhead cameras feeding into operations centers in San Diego and Washington. But the entire architecture of San Isidro rests on a single point of decision: the primary inspection booth. The officer in that booth is the front line of United States border enforcement at that lane. Each vehicle that pulls forward, that officer is required to interview the driver, scan the license plate, check travel documents, look at the occupants, and make a judgment call, send the vehicle through, or send it to secondary inspection for a closer look. Secondary inspection is where the dogs work, where the trunks come open, where the gas tanks get scanned, where the door panels get removed. Roughly 7 to 10% of vehicles get referred. The rest pass through the lane on the primary officer's word alone. Therefore, the integrity of the entire San Isidro architecture depends on each officer in each booth making that decision honestly, every time, on every car. The system assumes the officer in the uniform is not for sale. That assumption is what makes the corrupt officer in the booth the most valuable asset a drug trafficking organization could ever recruit. Because the officer in the booth does not need to do anything dramatic. He does not need to plant evidence. He does not need to fight off colleagues. He just has to wave. The cartels on the Mexican side of the line understand this geometry better than anyone in Washington. They count lanes. They time shift changes. They watch which officers go on break and when. They study who is friendly at the window and who is hostile. They build profiles. And when a primary inspection officer is willing to talk to them off duty, they remember. The first contact happened in late 2021. Federal prosecutors never fully reconstructed the original meeting. What they could reconstruct, from text messages, financial records, and cooperator testimony, was that by November of that year, Leonard George was in regular contact with at least 2 members of a drug trafficking organization operating out of Tijuana and Mexicali. Within weeks, the structure of the arrangement was complete. George would notify the organization at the start of each shift. The text would identify which port he was working, which lane he had been assigned that day, and how long the assignment would last. The traffickers had approximately 1 hour to get a vehicle to his lane. The notification message was almost always 1 or 2 lines. George, November 19th, 2021, 5:14 a.m. Booth 14 today, about an hour. Contact, November 19th, 2021, 5:15 a.m. Copy. Moving now. When the vehicle reached his window, George processed it without referral. He scanned the plate. He glanced at the driver. He waved it through. Total time at the booth, 15 to 40 seconds. To make the records inconsistent with the actual occupants, George began entering false data into the lane system. Where the vehicle had 3 people in it, he logged 1. Where the driver's name was on the registration, he entered a different name. Where the passenger was a known member of the organization, he listed no passenger at all. Every primary inspection generates a digital footprint. George spent 6 months poisoning that footprint deliberately, 1 entry at a time. The traffickers gave him a nickname. They called him the goalie. It was a sports metaphor. The goalie is the last defender on the field. He stands in front of the goal. He stops the ball, unless he is on the other team's payroll. Then he watches the ball roll past him and into the net. The goalie nickname spread inside the organization. It appeared in text messages between traffickers who had never spoken to George directly. By early 2022, members of the cartel, 3 steps removed from him, were referring to him by that name in their phones. The payments came in cash, sometimes hand-delivered at meetings on the Mexican side of the line during George's days off, sometimes wired through intermediaries, sometimes left in vehicles in agreed parking lots in Chula Vista. The amounts escalated. A single waived vehicle could pay $2,000. 3 vehicles in one shift could pay $12,000. A truly heavy load, a half-ton of methamphetamine in concealed compartments, could pay $50,000. And George began to spend. Not in obvious ways. He did not buy a mansion. He did not lease a Ferrari. But he started paying off credit card debt that had been delinquent for years. He paid cash for a new washer and dryer. He took his wife to dinner at a steakhouse on Coronado that he had never been able to afford. He covered his son's community college tuition in a single payment. To anyone who looked, it looked like a man who had finally caught up. The signs were there for anyone who cared to look. His shift partners noticed that he stopped complaining about money. His supervisor noticed that his lane volume on certain days included an unusually high number of vehicles, cleared in under 20 seconds. A neighbor noticed that his garage now contained tools and equipment that had not been there the month before. No one reported any of it. No one wrote a memo. No one filed a complaint. The system assumed the officer in the booth was not for sale. The officer in the booth knew that, and he used it. February 8th, 2022 was a Tuesday. The morning shift at San Isidro started at 5. George was assigned to lane 11 for the first 6 hours. He sent his notification at 5:09 a.m. The organization had a vehicle in the queue by 6:15. But the vehicle behind that one was the problem. A 2015 Toyota Sienna minivan, white, with a single male driver, had been flagged on a multi-agency watch list maintained by HSI San Diego. The flag was tied to a sensor hit 2 weeks earlier on a different vehicle owned by the same registered name. The flag was not visible to George at his booth window. It was visible in the broader CBP system that ran in the background of every primary inspection screen. When the plate scanned, the screen lit up red. George had a choice. He could fabricate a reason to ignore the flag. He could pretend the system had not alerted. He could wave the van through anyway. He could not. The flag was logged centrally. If the vehicle came back later as a smuggling load and the central log showed the flag had been overridden, his name would be on it. He sent the van to secondary. Secondary inspection took the van apart over the next 4 hours. Behind the rear quarter panels and inside a custom-built false floor, agents recovered approximately 222 pounds of methamphetamine, vacuum-sealed in kilo bricks. Street value over $1.5 million. The driver was arrested at the scene. The DEA was notified. HSI opened a file. A different officer might have understood what had just happened. The flag system had caught a load on his lane. Eyes were about to be on his lane. The smart move was to shut down the arrangement, lawyer up, and go quiet. George did the opposite. The second vehicle in the queue, which had been moving directly behind the flagged Sienna, was also affiliated with the same organization. It was carrying over 200 additional pounds of narcotics in a similar concealment. George knew it. The traffickers knew he knew it. The vehicle pulled to his booth 12 minutes after the flagged van had been sent to secondary. He waved it through. The day after that February 8th episode, George received a text from a coordinator inside the organization confirming a payment of approximately $13,000 for the second vehicle. The payment was hand-delivered. George then drove to a Cadillac dealership in Mission Valley. He paid cash, in full, for a 2020 Cadillac CT5 sedan. The salesman processed the paperwork. The plates were temporary. 6 days later, on February 14th, 2022, Valentine's Day, George drove the Cadillac across the border into Mexico. He delivered the car to an associate of the organization in Ensenada. The associate was a woman. The handoff included a photograph. Federal prosecutors would later admit that photograph at trial. He drove back across the border that evening in a different vehicle. He went to work the next morning. He sent the notification text at the start of his shift. The arrangement continued. The 222-pound methamphetamine seizure in February of 2022 did not, by itself, point to Leonard George. The seizure pointed to a smuggling load. The agencies that worked the seizure, HSI San Diego, the FBI, and the DEA, worked it as a load investigation, traced backward. The driver of the flagged van was offered a cooperation deal. He took it. What he gave the agents was a name, the goalie. For months, the agents did not know what the name meant. They knew only that someone inside CBP at San Isidro was being paid by this organization, and that the name appeared in text threads they had begun to access through court-authorized wiretaps and seized devices. The first time the name was tied to a specific officer was through a phone seized from a low-level courier in May of 2022. On that phone, a contact entry simply read, "Goalie," followed by a cell number. Subscriber records on that cell number traced to a prepaid burner registered with false data. But the location data on the burner placed it inside the San Isidro Port of Entry employee parking lot during the start of every weekday morning shift for 6 months running. The investigation pivoted. CBP Office of Professional Responsibility was looped in. Special Agent in Charge Elizabeth Cervantes assigned a team. HSI San Diego, under Special Agent in Charge Sean Gibson, ran the criminal side. FBI San Diego, under Special Agent in Charge Stacy Moy, ran the financial side. DHS-OIG, under Inspector General Joseph V. Kafari, ran the conduct review. The 4 agencies built the case in parallel, sharing everything. The financial side broke open first. George's bank deposits did not match the $73,000 federal salary his W-2 reported. Cash deposits had appeared in 3 separate accounts over a 6-month window, totaling more than $90,000. The Cadillac purchase appeared on dealership records. Cell tower data placed his phone in Ensenada on February 14th, 2022. The text messages broke open second. The traffickers had been sloppy. They had stored the notification messages. They had stored the payment confirmations. They had stored, in one case, a screenshot of a $68,000 payment for letting 4 vehicles cross in a single shift in April of 2022. And then the smoking gun. On a phone seized from a member of the organization in the late summer of 2022, agents recovered a selfie photograph. The photograph showed a man standing in what appeared to be a garage. The man was wearing a United States Customs and Border Protection officer's uniform jacket. The jacket was George's. The name tape was visible. The CBP shoulder patch was visible. The trafficker had taken the picture for his own amusement in a moment of bravado and saved it to his phone. When investigators showed the photograph to senior CBP leadership in San Diego, the conversation in the room went silent. The jacket was the institutional credential of the United States border enforcement architecture. The man wearing it had been moving methamphetamine across that border for 6 months. George was indicted by a federal grand jury later that year. Prosecutors charged him with 19 separate documented bribery occasions, conspiracy to import controlled substances, and receiving bribes by a public official. Quick question for you before we get to the trial. When you look at a photograph of a known trafficker grinning into a camera while wearing a federal officer's uniform jacket, what does that tell you about how deep the corruption was running? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe if you haven't yet. The sentence in this one is on the heavy end, and you are going to want to hear the judge's exact words. The arrest happened on a weekday morning. Federal agents had coordinated the operation for weeks. The plan was simple. They would wait until George reported for his shift at San Isidro. They would not take him in the booth, with vehicles in line and civilians at the window. They would take him in the muster room before he went on duty, with his service weapon still in the locker. He walked into the muster room at 4:52 a.m. He was in full uniform. He was carrying a thermos of coffee in his right hand and his department-issue cover under his left arm. He set the thermos down on the long briefing table. 2 HSI special agents and 2 members of CBP Office of Professional Responsibility were waiting in the room. The shift supervisor stepped to the side. The other officers in the room stopped what they were doing. "Officer George, step away from the table, please. Keep your hands visible." He looked at the agents. He looked at the supervisor. He looked at the table. He set the thermos down a second time, more slowly, as if he were measuring it. "What is this about?" "You are under arrest. The charges are listed in this document. Turn around for me, slowly." His shoulders dropped about an inch. He did not argue. He did not run. He did not reach for his sidearm. He turned around. The cuffs went on over the uniform he had worn for 8 years. "Am I being charged federally?" "You are. This is a federal warrant." "I want to speak with my lawyer." "You will have the opportunity. Walk with us." He walked. Other officers in the muster room had stopped what they were doing. None of them said anything. The badge on his chest caught the fluorescent light as he was led out into the hallway. One of the OPR agents read him his rights as they walked toward the parking lot. The thermos of coffee was still sitting on the briefing table when the room emptied for the morning shift. That was the last time Leonard George ever wore the uniform. The federal grand jury for the Southern District of California returned the indictment on multiple counts, including receiving bribes by a public official, conspiracy to import methamphetamine, and a series of substantive bribery counts tied to specific lane crossings between November 2021 and June 2022. Assistant United States Attorneys Bianca Calderon Peñalosa, Brandon J. Kimura, and Michael G. Wheat were assigned to the case. United States Attorney Tara K. McGrath supervised. The defense filed motions to suppress the cell location data and the seized photographs. Every motion was denied. The trial opened in late spring of 2024 in the federal courthouse on Front Street in downtown San Diego. The government called over 30 witnesses across 2 weeks. HSY agents walked the jury through the text message trail. FBI financial analysts walked them through the deposits and the Cadillac purchase. A cooperator from the trafficking organization, testifying under a plea agreement, identified George by name and described the notification protocol in detail. A CBP supervisor explained the primary inspection lane system and what it looked like when an officer was processing vehicles without referral in under 20 seconds. And then the prosecution put the selfie photograph on the courtroom monitors. The jacket, the patch, the name tape, the trafficker grinning into the camera. The image filled the screen for 30 seconds without commentary. The jury did not look away. One juror later told reporters, anonymously, that the photograph was the moment the case ended for her. On June 10, 2024, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on 4 counts. Sentencing was scheduled for October 25, 2024. United States District Judge Todd Robinson presided. The courtroom was full. Family members of George sat in the gallery behind the defense table. CBP personnel sat behind the prosecution table. The agents who had built the case sat in the second row. The government's sentencing memorandum requested the high end of the guidelines. The defense requested mercy, citing George's military service, his clean record before the offense, and the economic pressures that he claimed had driven the conduct. Judge Robinson did not accept the framing. The defendant in this case wore the uniform of the United States. He stood at the front line of the border enforcement architecture, at the busiest land port of entry in the Western Hemisphere. He swore an oath to defend that border, and then he sold the door for cash. The harm here is not abstract. Hundreds of pounds of methamphetamine entered the domestic distribution system because the man at the booth was on the wrong payroll. The sentence in this case must reflect the gravity of that betrayal and the necessity of deterrence. The sentence was 280 months, 23 years and 4 months in federal prison. George showed no visible reaction. His attorney indicated intent to file an appeal. United States Attorney McGrath spoke to reporters on the courthouse steps after the sentencing. She said, "What is important to remember about the story of Leonard George is that his corruption was discovered and defeated. Our commitment to the integrity of the badge brought justice to a corrupt officer in this case, who will spend decades behind bars." George was remanded into the custody of the United States Marshals Service. He was transferred to a federal correctional institution within a month. Projected release year, given good time, is 2045. He will be 62 years old when he walks out. The Cadillac CT5 he bought with cash on February 9th, 2022, was seized and forfeited. The framed swearing-in photograph that hung on his mother's living room wall came down sometime in the months before the verdict. No one in the family says where it went. The lane he worked at San Isidro is still open. A different officer stands in that booth now, every morning, making the same decisions he was supposed to make. This case was disturbing, but the case on your screen right now is even worse. Click it.